Welcome everyone. So back to a normal Zoom and the program of today. I'm really happy to have the wonderful Carla Gannis with us, and she will introduce a continuous project Wunderkammer from XR to social VR. And to accompany her, we have delightful Isabella Helms to curate and moderate the talk. And on those good words, let's start. And thank you so much for coming tonight, Carla.
Yes, thank you, Carla, so much for coming. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. I'm hoping my introductions can do you some justice, but very briefly, Carla Gannis is an interdisciplinary artist based in New York. Her work invites viewers to experience life through a digital looking glass, where reflections on power, sexuality, marginalization, and agency emerge. Carla's work challenges how we perceive digital art in relation to the canon of art history. Through bringing past narratives to life through digital avatars and present-day communication, we start to see how classical motifs can be used within 21st century narratives. I'm so excited to be in conversation with Carla tonight. Focusing on her ongoing Wunderkammer project with 3 Ws, we plan to reflect on the future of archiving in light of technological advances and how her work and how her XR solo exhibition was transformed into a social VR exhibition. But if you would like to introduce your work.
Sure, and thank you all for coming today, and especially thank you Mimi and Isabella and Agora, of course, everyone there for inviting me. And we are all used to these technical difficulties, so I'm so excited just being able to connect with you the best we all can during this extended kind of difficult period across the world. And I see some other people are joining, I think, so great. I'm going to share my screen and we'll make sure that's working too. All right. So does everybody see a screen with, avatars and a grid? Are we good there? Okay, cool. And let me just I have some notes because I'm going to try to keep this brief so that Bella and I can actually get into our conversation. The one project I'm focusing on today is the Wunderkammer project. Oh, and I might ask if everyone could mute right now because for some reason I'm getting a little echo. And then once we get into conversation, unmute. Yeah, maybe that just makes it a little easier. Or maybe it's my machine. We'll see. Okay, I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to talk about the Wunderkammer project, or Wunderkammer, but I call it Wunderkammer with my American accent. And I want to go relatively quickly. I was inspired by the 16th century Wunderkammer with 1W, also called Cabinets of Curiosity, as well as the contemporary social media practice of creating archives and collections on sites like Pinterest, Instagram, Tumblr. And I am kind of trying to deconstruct these really canny and uncanny complications of what is grounded reality, virtual reality, and all of those the fabric that connects the two, or connects all the R's. We have extended reality, virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, so all of the different realities. And I'm building these virtual worlds founded upon decolonizing post-human and feminist archives. And, traditionally, Wunderkammers, they were precursors to museums. And they most often took up entire rooms, and they were usually produced by people who had the luxury to travel the world and build collections. And they were filled with arts and antiques, natural specimens, scientific instruments, and they were collected from the far reaches of the globe. And often, like the internet today, they combined fact with fantasy. And so in my www.underkammer, I have collected and created remixes of physical objects and 3D virtual objects, also from across the globe, but I did not travel anywhere outside of my Brooklyn studio to do so. So it has all been a web-based project. Here you see a physical and an AR component of the project, 7 avatars, who I first began to develop these avatars in 2017. They all have identities. I'll get to that later. So let me just continue on, and that should be playing. So this slide shows the physical and virtual installation of the Wunderkammer at Telematic Media Arts in San Francisco, California. This was in March of 2020. The show opened on the Ides of March 15th, and within 2 days, we had to close the show until September of that year due to COVID lockdown. The exhibition takes place in several layers of reality. Again, the R's, grounded, augmented, and complete immersion into virtual reality. So this is just an overlay showing you that I built an entire one-to-one kind of replica of the gallery in virtual space. And next. Now, this is my second solo exhibition that I produced with my avatar, C.A.R.L.A.G.A.N. cross-platform avatar for recursive life action generative adversarial network. And I will call her C. for short. And then where it all started. So this was a physical print that was actually featured in the exhibition, and it reveals where the ideas for the Wunderkammer began. In C. studio, for one, and you see news headlines ominously project through her windows. And then, of course, a lot of the work takes place in my own studio in Brooklyn, New York. And here's a shot of my studio with all of my virtual friends and my cat, Bashi. Also, much of the work took place in ML, that's machine learning. And it is a machine learning studio that is hosted by Playform.io. And it is here where I train Playform on thousands upon thousands of image data sets pertaining to the topics I chose to address: endangered species, emerging species, and climate change, politics, networks, and digital semiotics, decolonization and global pluralism, humor as salve and feminist salvation, obsolete and emerging technologies, and sex and comfort in tech. The images generated by Playform I then collaged and created patterns from to line every cabinet in the Wunderkammer project, both in physical and virtual reality. And this is an installation shot of the physical installation. That is a hand-painted holodeck. I'm referring both to Star Trek Next Generation and the critically important book, Hamlet on the Holodeck by Janet Murray. Oh, you know what? I'm going to backtrack 1 second. I'm sorry about this, but I just also wanted to make sure that all of these acknowledgments were made, because as I talk about hand-painted and all of this work, this is a list of everyone who has worked with me on the project at this time. And a big thanks to James X. Patterson and Janine Kelly, who worked with me on the painting of that grid in the gallery. So acknowledgements given. And so again, this is a reference both to the sci-fi classic television series, Star Trek Next Generation, and the critically important book, Hamlet on the Holodeck by Janet Murray, first published in 1997, where she quite accurately forecasted the future of art in virtual domains. She released a new version of it in 2017, and she got so much right. I've been teaching from this book for years. The floor is also covered with a carpet that includes a pattern from the film Lawnmower Man, if anyone knows that film, from 1992. At the time, it represented the apogee of special effects, but the special effects and the story are cheesy today and somewhat problematic too, by today's standards, the way certain issues of mental health are covered in the film. But at the time, it represented, and this is what I'm focusing on, the first big wave of interest in VR. Of course, we had, VR that was being, worked on in the 60s, but in the late 80s and early 90s, pioneers like Jaron Lanier were making strides in VR, and this movie represented that. Now, setting this holodeck up in this way, I was trying to emphasize how the internet and virtuality is now something that is every day to us. It's part of our daily lives, part of the fabric of our day-to-day domestic lives. But little did I know that with COVID-19, this would become even truer for everyone on the planet. And here's another installation shot and a memento mori ready-made sculpture that led into the VR portal of the show. And so right after you looked at this sculpture, you put a headset like this on your own head to go into the VR. A few people did get to experience the desktop single user version. I don't think I shared my sound here, and so that I can keep talking and get through this so that we can get to the conversation parts, there is a wonderful soundtrack that was composed by Luc Dubois. And if you visit the project that's now in Social VR, you'll be able to hear all of the music that he composed. But anyway, a few people got to experience the desktop single user version of the VR Wunderkammer. So that's single user and it's running on the GPU of a computer, right? And in this VR version, people could actually interact with the objects in the cabinet, rearrange them, create new taxonomies. I'll scrub through this a little faster so you can actually see where you could kind of pick up objects and move them around. The entire VR experience consisted of thousands of objects in the space. But when the show closed due to COVID, I think we all found ourselves pivoting, and I decided to recreate this desktop VR experience as a social web VR experience. However, social VR has many limitations. And I'm not getting into definitions. Some of you might not even know what social VR or web VR exactly is, but in the conversation, we can unpack that more, okay? So anyway, social VR or web VR. So this is a web-based experience. You don't have to have a headset. You can wear a headset and be fully immersed, or you can just view it like an online game, 3D game. But it couldn't support the kind of interactions and the thousands of discrete 3D objects I'd put in the desktop version. So I had to reconsider what that experience would be like. And I began a series of drawings to work out ways to reconsider these cabinets. Also, given what was going on in the world facing two pandemics, COVID and systemic racism, I began to add even more objects as signs and signifiers of the times we were living in. And I added those to the drawings of the cabinets to kind of work out what I would be producing as a social VR work. So this is a cabinet of network culture. This is a cabinet of endangered and emerging species. Since 2017, I have a whole archive of thousands of new species, animal species and plant species that have been discovered. But due to climate change, many of them are already on endangered species lists. These are two drawings. One is the cabinet of decolonization and global pluralism, and the cabinet of comedy as salve. And then this is the history of political frameworks and the cabinet of obsolete tech. And from those, these should play automatically, I then translated them into moving image works. I'll shout out to my studio assistant at the time, Nath Lu, who worked with me through the summer. This was quite a Herculean task. And for some reason, these videos aren't looping. We'll just loop them again. So the left is the cabinet of comedy as female salvation, and it includes AI-trained images on female-identified comedians from every continent of the globe. And then the decolonization cabinet to the right. The next cabinet as an animation, this is the cabinet of emerging tech. And I include references in this cabinet to Ruha Benjamin, the New Jim Code, and Nick Bostrom, perverse instantiations, and several other kind of allusions are drawn there. And then this shows you a GIF of the main chamber of the Wunderkammer in social VR. It's currently on view at Synthesis Gallery on their link to their social VR site. And I'll talk more about that very soon. And I'm providing here, you can see the link to the show, or you can Google Recollecting Futures Synthesis Gallery. And I'm linking to that instead of directly to my project, because I really hope you'll see it within the context of the incredibly new ideas and on the topic of digital archives that the curators have unpacked in curating this show and selecting several different artists to participate. And then these are a few different screen grabs from the experience. In that top left, there is my avatar, and then Carla Gannis, or C-Dot, now is an autonomous avatar. So she has her own avatar in these various spaces. This meta-narrative keeps growing and growing. And then there is also a small library included in the Wunderkammer with book titles by Doris Lessing, Ursula K. Le Guin, Octavia Butler, Toni Morrison, and Mary Shelley, to name a few, and newspaper articles from around the world on pandemics and also on fake news. And as an outgrowth of the Wunderkammer, I'll just say it American style, I co-curated the Archive to Come exhibition with Clark Buckner in the fall of 2020. And it was an exhibition in social VR, also on the gallery's website, and installed in the gallery where people could visit by appointment, of course, with masks. And we invited 57 international artists from, across the world to participate by submitting short time-based works. And some artists also submitted sculptural works for the social VR component. And each of their works addressed questions of loss, memorialization, crisis, and reinvention through the lens of contemporary network culture and digital media. And we had the show again, there were different categories that we selected that we kind of grouped the works in. But in creating, I built this architectonic structure to house all their works, and I made it in the round so that we could make new connections between these works outside of these original taxonomies that we kind of constructed as co-curators. And then one thing I really have enjoyed about translating the project into a fully online experience is getting to open it up to a community. And here are a few screenshots of different people visiting different locations in the Wunderkammer over the past several months. And it was also a special joy to participate in Superhighway on New Year's Eve 2020. This was organized by Miriam Arbus and Matthew Gant. And I wish you could hear the audio here. But what was so great about this project is they invited VR artists, again, from across the globe to participate in this project for 24 hours. And of course, we're all in different time zones. So Miriam and Matthew got no sleep. And so they were the ones who took us along this social VR superhighway, and we were each scheduled, and people would drop into our spaces. And the amazing artist Luc Dubois, who also composed an original soundtrack for my project, as I mentioned, did a live performance that night during the superhighway event. And you can see various people there. I also opened up another social VR space, and Effie Vision, another amazing artist, did a live performance. So that was really an exciting, the first time I'd had live performances in the Wunderkammer space. And now getting to the exhibition that I'm currently part of, Recollecting Futures. And this exhibition is about investigating the roles of information processing and the possibilities of archival methods in our future of mixed realities. Recollecting Futures presents 3 contemporary artistic perspectives on how we store, evaluate, and share information and memories. And in an effort to cope with the vastness of information that is circulating in all different kinds of media, as we know, the curators, Miriam Arbus, who is working with Synthesis Gallery, and Julia Schmelzer of Pylon Hubs Gallery, united with Mohsen Hazarati, Christopher Merdo, and myself. And this is showing you the entrance where they created a show space to house parts of all of our works that then link and go to the kind of rhizomatic structures we've each built to unpack and to investigate and explore ideas of the archive in the 21st century. And for Recollecting Futures, I have launched the next phase of the Wunderkammer with many new interconnected hubs. So there are 7 symbolic post-human agents or avatars who inhabit the Wunderkammer core universe, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the talk. There's Lady Ava Interface, a machine learning assistant to cultural institutions. She first made her debut on the Whitney Museum for a project that I was asked to do in 2018. There's Lucille Trackball, an AI stand-up comedian, and you see her performing in the Wunderkammer. There's, of course, Carla Gannis. There is Victoria, the android archivist. She's getting ready for an interview soon. There is Maura, who is actually conducting the interview in this space, and Maura is a sex and comfort robot. And then there is Oliver, a cyborg influencer and politician, and Tipu's tiger. And Tipu first emerged when I was doing a project that was curated by someone from the Victoria and Albert Museum, and I found Tipu's tiger in the V&A. And Tipu here as an avatar is the electronic cat meme de-colonizer. It is amazing how much Tipu's tiger originally well, I won't go into too much of this, but if you just Google Tipu's tiger, you'll find out how popular Tipu is. Each of these personas will be conducting interviews with human artists, researchers, theorists, activists, scientists, and more. And each new, again, I'll just let that leap while I talk. Each new interview, each new story is situated in custom-built wonder chambers. 3D environments that respond specifically to the interviewee and their area of expertise. And so for the opening of Recollecting Futures, we premiered on the opening day Lube River 2.0, and this is the work of artist Leah Rowe, and it is a new chamber of wonder and inquiry based off of Rowe's project Lube River. It was a VR experience that destigmatized conversations around sex and pleasure, and she first conceived this with Motherlode at New Ink in 2017. And then here is just a sneak peek at the one that we're building right now. And I'm working with my fabulous studio assistant, Sue Rowe, and we are building a wonder chamber for Dr. Charlotte Kent, professor of visual culture, a critic and expert on the absurd as well. And stay tuned. Regina Hersteny is our next interview. We're also building a wonder chamber for her on digital art preservation, and there are many more lined up. And I'll stop sharing. Hopefully I got that in about 10 minutes.
Oh, thank you so much. That was so much information. But,
I'm a maximalist.
I'm so glad this is online because we can all experience it. Really brings this social VR into the community, like you said, and it becomes a space where we can all learn. We don't have to visit the gallery to learn about what's inside your Wunderkammer, and it creates a space for people to connect over the issues that are raised within the work itself, which is so exciting. So if although it's such a shame people couldn't go to the physical exhibition so much during COVID, I'm glad that we do get to experience it.
Thank you.
I'll start with my first question for you, Carla. Wunderkammer sparks a great conversation around the future of archival spaces and how we interact with them. I was wondering if you could talk to us about the future of experiencing collections and exhibitions digitally. And does VR technology make this more accessible for people?
Well, I think with the advent of social VR and web VR, which, by the way, people have been working with these technologies for quite some time, but it has, again, just kind of, I think partially due to COVID, it has reached a critical mass, or maybe not a critical mass. I'm working in it, and so for me it feels like it is, but I think it has that potential too. So I think that there is really quite a bit of potential here, and the thing that's exciting to me, I remember like in 2018, I went to the last South by Southwest that was an in-person event, and I was giving a talk there, but I went to a lot of different presentations, and there was so much on particularly web VR or web XR, with AR and VR potentialities, and that people did not have to buy an expensive headset, although commercial headsets are now much less expensive than they were. In the 90s, they were hundreds of thousands of dollars. A few years ago, they were several thousands of dollars. Now you can get a commercial grade one for like $200. But even for people who can't even afford that, you could use things like Google Cardboard, your own smartphone, or a browser. And so the idea that can reach more people outside of whatever kind of bubbles exist in fine arts or arts communities was really exciting to me, and that potential of storytelling, etc. And but I was still exploring at the time in my own work more kind of desktop VR, these single user experiences. And so really as a response to the fact that we all had to en masse, go online, that's when I really started thinking about these potentialities. And since I first, embarked on working in social VR, I teach VR. So some of my students were already starting to work in these spaces as well. Last spring of 2020, I'd made some web VR single user experiences before that, but like to actually do a social VR experience. Since then, there have been so many galleries popping up, so many shows, and it's really been exciting to see that more and more people are, getting over whatever kind of technophobia they may have or presumptions they have about digital spaces and it being inauthentic or, it's not the same. Of course, it's not the same as a physical gallery, but it's a place where we can commune and a place where we can experience the ideas of art. And then in terms of collections, I'm working on a project for the summer I'll try to keep this brief, where I want to actually build a toolkit so that other people can build collections in 3D. There already are some tools in Mozilla Hubs for doing that, but I kind of want to build out on that idea and build collections that represent, their positionality in the world, their cultural identity, or whatever kind of ways they want to express their identity. Because that's something else that I think is really important when we look at archives today online. We see, people who are building, archives on Pinterest, on Instagram, but these are all more 2D grids, like this Zoom interface. And what would it be like if they could actually build inhabitable archives? I think I've said enough for now. Let's get to more questions.
I think, yeah, that's such a great answer. I think it's so important that we can be able to connect in this way during these times. Oh, that was so lovely. Oh, I think I keep losing you, but there we go. But I think we must have touched on this, but this year undoubtedly has changed the way we all work so much. And I think it's very easy to think about digital artists because we're all using tech. Maybe your work hasn't changed that much, but how has the pandemic impacted the way you work? So undoubtedly it has.
Yeah, it definitely has. And again, if we'll do the back and forth mute thing, I'll do it too. I'll try to remember too. Yeah, and I think we've all been impacted, and I know we've attended so many talks where we're discussing this, but we have to give voice to these things, and I think kind of mutually sharing is a way that we can grow and empathize, right? And so. As I was talking about, just translating this entire project that I'd worked on for several years into social VR, I mean, that was an impact of COVID-19. And then curating the Archive to Come exhibition, which is an outgrowth of Wunderkammer, but its own thing, because that was a representation of all of these artists' works on ideas of the archive, on what is important to preserve. And I think I've thought long and hard about, the normal of before and how problematic so much of that was, and the fact that we were still kind of basing so much of work and life and even all kind of models of the way we do business and communicate on what is the word I'm looking for? I had the word it'll come to me. Well, we were basing it on more of here it is, 19th or early 20th century industrial age model, right? We are living in the digital age. And to base it on, kind of to still be operating, even though we've had the internet for over 20 years and now it's highly functional for the most part, still there can be issues with Zoom, that the 9 to 5, work week, all of these things where we show up to an office, all of that is a product of the industrial age. The whole 9 to 5, work week was institutionalized in the 1940s in the United States, for example. And here we have been living through a major paradigm shift. And so I first started talking about my own practice, but also, kind of how that extends as an educator, as an artist, as a advocate for others. How do we work with these new kind of models for communication, for conversation, etc., and how will they extend into the future? I don't think that just returning to normal post COVID, I mean, the old normal was incredibly problematic. And so to even, say, oh, we're all going to get back to normal, hopefully we've learned a lot from all of this.
Absolutely. And if anything, it gives us the chance to look back at the way we used to live and challenge the way we thought about things. And then especially these technologies and the way we can connect gives us, I know on Twitter, I've learned more about the world and social dilemmas more than any other platform, because people are speaking and having this conversation, which is exciting that now we can do it through artworks and through these immersive spaces, that especially in this Wunderkammer, you can go and face these social dilemmas and think about the way we're going to come out of this situation, which actually brings me on to my third question quite well, because the juxtaposition between historical practices and progressive narratives which you address in your work, such as Black Lives Matter movement, feminist movements, really captured me during my research on you, and I think that's what really hooked me into your work. on your website, your question, a question that stuck with me was, what histories demand to be foregrounded and what legacy should be left behind, which ties into our conversations about how we need to change the way we live when we come out of this pandemic. Do you think that technology gives us the opportunity to become more inclusive in the histories that we convey?
Yeah, that is such a good question. And actually yesterday, because I mentioned about my practice today that I incorporate artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms into my practice, and I've been working with Playform for over 2 years, this platform that was designed by computer scientist Ahmed Elgamal. And what's so great about it is, like social VR, it's accessible to artists. They don't have to do the back-end programming, and they can actually bring content to this platform and begin to train these models. And what I have been learning from that, and one reason I wanted to train the models on these different kind of topics that I had chosen to represent in the Wunderkammer, was thinking about bias and how it can be perpetuated. Ruha Benjamin, again, is a person who speaks as a sociologist very, very articulately about this, and as an expert, that we can perpetuate systems of structural racism and bias and all of the different kind of systems that are about excluding others, and so that is a threat to all of this exciting technology that is being produced and made right now. But I think that's why it's important, and this was something that kind of came up in conversation yesterday between an art historian, an artist, and a computer scientist. It sounds like a joke. Like, what happens when an art historian, a computer scientist, and an artist go into a convention, but really that these conversations need to be happening between scientists, artists, humanities, sociologists, so that we can actually live up to these progressive goals that we, many in the progressive community, of course, want to see as our future, right? And, one other thing about tackling the Wunderkammer, I am not an expert on these topics. And so this, from the very beginning of the project, I had planned and have written extensively about it. And I'm in a New Ink, I'm a member at New Ink for this year as part of their X-Artists Bodies in Space, is opening it up to others. And the first kind of phase of that was curating this show where I could include 57 other artists and really foreground their work, their positionalities, their visions, their perspectives from multiple viewpoints, right? And positionalities. And then now with the interviews I'm conducting and building extended Wonder Chambers linked to that original one, it's also getting the viewpoints of experts on these topics. Because one issue we see with archives, right, is that there can be bias in that subjectivity historically. And historically, it has been the perspective primarily of white cisgendered Western men, right? And so, I deal with history a lot in my projects, and particularly I tend to deal with Western history and art history. And part of me, from, my education and my training, there's part of me that has a great deal of respect for, the work that has been produced over millennia. But I also think that we have to critically look at these different models that have been perpetuated into the future that is ours now, or, the present that is ours. And critically look at them, see what we can take from them, what that they're, instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? What can we take from them? What are, for me, sometimes it might be aesthetics, it might be ideas, it might be concepts, but how can they be repositioned or rearticulated to represent a present and hopefully a future that is more equitable to more people and includes and represents more people and their thoughts, perspectives, and positionalities. That was long-winded. I hope that kind of answered the question.
It's a question that needs a long answer. And
Yeah.
I think, just think if we live in an exciting time where we are looking back at history and retelling stories that were underrepresented. And I think that technology does give us the chance to do this because we can access so much information from our own homes. I particularly like to think of, like you were saying earlier, it was rich white men in the 16th, 17th centuries who had the privilege to collect, and it shapes what we think, how we think about collections now. So I do quite like, I would just love to see their reactions to something like the Wunderkammer. One, they think, where am I in this digital colourful space? But it's just, it reforms the way we think about how we collect and the social implications of it, which is really exciting. And I think we're going to see so much more of this, and hopefully the reshaping of museums. I think we're at a really good point in history where we're going to start thinking about it a lot more.
I'll talk quickly. One other thing about the objects in the Wunderkammer. Someone mentioned, oh, they're gold, and I actually made them copper, which is poor man's gold historically is how it's referred to, because I actually wanted them to kind of look like objects that, you know, could be historical, but also they're copper, they're not gold. And that was really important to me to make that distinction. And, you know, and that also the objects in the physical cabinet are things that are found from the internet. I actually have kept a list of every 3D object and every physical object that I've downloaded or purchased, so that I have original attribution to the, you know, authors of those works, and really thinking about remix culture and, you know, a generous approach to how we build archives today. Because on the internet, as we know, you know, remix and mashing up is just, you know, part of our culture. And how can we do it in such a way that, you know, we are giving attribution and sharing, you know, in our worldviews. Yeah.
Absolutely. It makes it all that more personal. I heard you talking on a podcast about how the reason why these historical practices come back up is because they relate to us personally, and then making it connect to a 21st century narrative then connects us again. We can always carry on that personal connection. And I think making it less unattainable and relating to our everyday makes us want to delve further into these conversations, which is really exciting. My fourth question for you is, the Wunderkammer exhibition at Telematic Gallery allowed us to experience your work in both the physical space in VR and physical space and in VR. What impact did you intend for this to have on visitors as they entered the VR space and saw the comparison?
Yeah, well, it's something I've been thinking about for quite some time, and I've produced other exhibitions. I produced an exhibition a year before that where I also constructed a VR. It was a web VR version with Google Cardboard, so it was very accessible to visitors. It was at a university. And what was fascinating to me is I, again, constructed a one-to-one replica of the gallery. So we've got some Baudrillard simulacra and simulation going on here. But the students who attended the experience, they spent more time, and part of this is the spectacle of VR, it's a new technology, but they spent more time looking at the gallery here than looking at the physical gallery that they were standing in. And that just, you know, made me start thinking about our relationship to what I refer to as grounded reality. I don't use, you know, acronyms like IRL or URL anymore in real life, you know, and online, because I feel like, particularly now more than ever, you know, they are intersecting in all of these interesting and sometimes confounding ways, right? And, you know, when I set up the installation of the gallery, I did kind of at first think of it in a linear way. You know, you first kind of walk in, you have physical objects. I'm playing with trompe l'oeil, the actual print that I showed earlier. It looks like it's in a frame. It has all the shadows, but that's actually flat on the wall. So already starting to confound, which has been happening for several centuries, our sense of what is real, what is fake, what is, you know, the lie that tells the truth that perspectival painting has, you know, had a conversation with for numerous centuries, right? From the Pompeii, the Herculaneum. I remember going to Herculaneum and seeing the, you know, paintings and amazed that they discovered 2-point and perspective at that time. And so so I'm already playing with those kind of tropes, but then, so those are the first tropes I'm playing with when you enter the gallery, in just those kind of, you know, trompe l'oeil, the framing convention. And then you enter the holodeck. And so in the holodeck, I have the different avatars. And so when you move a smartphone or a tablet in front of it, we had a tablet installed, they kind of come to life and they act as your guides through this, what could be uncanny new sense of reality. And these new layers are added to the show in that way. And then the next space you move to was where you actually put on the headset. After seeing the headset on a skull, by the way, had to put in a memento mori there, and you actually immerse in the space. But I built the VR experience so that when you exited the VR experience, you'd be in the exact same location as you are in physical reality, and you'd be seeing the same thing. And so that when the person takes off their headset, they see what they were seeing in the headset, but as, obeying the laws of physics, it's grounded reality. And so I really just wanted to kind of, open up for anyone who might be unfamiliar to it, but also for enthusiasts of this kind of work. I wanted to create that kind of multi-layered experience that maybe the first time you walk through, you're kind of making distinctions between the realities. And then hopefully after time, if you had the affordance to stay longer, you could start to kind of make new connections, think about what you were seeing in the virtual reality and comparing it to the physical. Jaron Lanier, again, someone I mentioned before, who was a pioneer in VR and was working in the late 80s and 90s and is still doing all sorts of research and development now, talks about VR not being a replacement for physical reality. Extended is a great kind of adjective. It's an extension of, but also that when you take off that VR headset, sometimes you pay more attention to things in your physical reality, the complexity of physical reality. And I think that that's still something very important. I'm super enthusiastic about technology, but I tend to, in most of my work, I create physical print work still and synthetic media works. Yeah.
It's so exciting how it amplifies both, and then both experiences are uncanny and exciting. Is that the reaction you got from people when they came out? Did they look a bit dazed when they came back to reality?
Sometimes, well, again, unfortunately, and I hope there will be a time in the future where I can kind of restage this as a physical installation. So for the 3 people who, because I went out 10 days earlier and I was already unsure whether we should even install the show, but there were so many unknown variables at that time. And so I spent, a week and a half installing the show. We had the opening night, and then 2 days later, San Francisco was shutting down, and then New York. And so, and at the opening, we were very careful. I mean, this is something else that has been really educational. Prior to this, I taught VR classes. I teach at NYU. I've been building an XR lab there, and we just pass headset from person to person. You never even thought about all of these issues of this should be sanitary. Let's wipe these things down. And of course, at the show, we were wiping everything down. Those first 2 days, and there were 2 visitors who had not experienced VR before. So that was really exciting for me, and for them to go into that experience in the headset and to be fully immersed, because unlike other digital technologies that are still mediated and framed, so to speak, XR or VR, virtual reality, and to some degree mixed reality, but virtual reality is really about this full immersion where your brain tricks you into accepting this reality like it accepts a dream when you're sleeping at night. And that's an amazing experience. And I'm happy that it seems more and more people are starting to get excited or interested in VR technology as an art form too.
Absolutely. It's exciting that there's, like you said, that sort of phobia from technology is kind of diminishing in society. The more we use it, the more we realize its benefits and how exciting it is. Actually, contemporary digital culture is something that is at the forefront of Wunderkammer and other projects that you've done, such as the Garden of Emoji Delights. What has actually sparked this interest in connecting 21st century narratives to famous practices such as the Wunderkammer and Cabinet Curiosities and other famous bits of art history?
So I'm probably going to give you a kind of convoluted reply because there are many, many factors. When I first moved to New York, I don't think I've mentioned this, but I have 2 degrees in painting. I went back to back, got a degree, an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree. That's how we refer to it in the United States. And so in painting, and I'm talking about like really old school painting. And because I came from this really small town. I'd never been introduced to art. My relatives, I'm the first person in my family to finish college or go on to grad school. So also, I wasn't someone who was acculturated to be in the arts or to be an artist, but I believed in it. And so, I go to painting school, and then after grad school, I taught myself computing in grad school, and that's what brought me to New York. And I get to New York, and I am databasing. This is how I'm, and I started assisting other artists and doing technology work. And that's when I realized that I should apply that to my own practice. I no longer wanted to be a painter. I wanted to be someone of my time. This is the late 90s. And something, though, that still struck a chord with me in the fine arts community is digital art really wasn't kind of received at that time as a valid art form, just like the early days of photography, film, and many other kind of art forms, even the dematerialized art object of conceptual art prior to it. And that kind of irked me. And also, there were people like Andy Warhol. Love him or hate him, the one thing that I really appreciated about him was the way that he kind of brought low and high together, and the way that he incorporated pop art into what is considered a fine art commodity, right? And so that was very compelling to me. Class stratification, just based on my own background, was really important to me. And so to bring internet vernacular or semiotics into the work that I produced was really, I was like, I don't want it to be too highfalutin. I want to actually communicate and make works that are expressing themselves through the everyday language of our day, and not just art language, but like the language of internet culture. But also, I'd spent a lot of time studying art history. As a kid growing up in this little tiny town, one thing that gave me hope and inspiration was to get out of there was, looking at all of these great artists, right? And so I think that is just kind of embedded in my psyche. And so kind of revisiting these things, particularly with some of my projects, like there's this project called the Selfie Drawings, where I'm revisiting all of these masters, because I think that the master system of, art history, where you have the old masters, is highly problematic anyway. And we still perpetuate that again in the arts today. And so, to insert myself into those histories also felt empowering and gave me agency. So as I said, this is a really convoluted answer, and I went all the way back to my childhood to get there, but hopefully that kind of, if you unscramble it, it makes some sense.
No, it absolutely makes sense. Don't worry about that. I think it's really interesting because we talk about them as though they're separate entities, that the digital art and then old master paintings. But I think what a lot of people don't realize about digital art is not just pushing buttons. You paint yes. with digitally. Some take you years, right? And it's that fine art form, but in a language that speaks to maybe more people now in this technological age. So they do fit together so well, but it just maybe speaks to our society more today.
Yes, I remember someone once saying something about my work was accessible, and I mean recently actually, and then they apologized, because in art world parlance, for your work to be too accessible means that it's lowbrow or something. And again, there are so many different art worlds, so when I speak of that, that's one particular sector, right? And I was like, no, that's a compliment to me. The idea that I'm making something that's accessible with a garden of emoji delights, it was amazing, the response that I did not expect. When I first made the hell panel, and I thought I'd get laughed out of the gallery when I, hung it on the wall. And the response I got over the years, because I first started working on that project in 2013, where I'd get high school students writing to me and, art historians writing to me. And that was really, really exciting, that I was able to make a work that I didn't even have these expectations that it would kind of take on a life of its own, that it did, and that it appealed to such a broad range of people.
Absolutely. I think for most of us, that is the art world we're hoping to move more towards. That would be nicer. So you talked about your exhibition or your next project, Recollecting Futures, an extension of your ever-evolving Wunderkammer project. And it's about conveying artistic perspectives on archiving and its social impact. What have you learned from passing on these pressing questions on the future of archives to other artists to respond to, because it's something that you address so frequently yourself, and to see this question that obviously very much sits heavily with you, and you get to curate this exhibition as well, which must be so exciting. What impact has that had on you?
So with the Recollecting Futures, one, I'm so happy to be in the show with Chris and Mosen, who have very different, of course, approaches to speaking to this subject and actually kind of instantiating works that represent their ideas on the archive. For me, what has been exciting, and again, I encourage you all to please visit this show and see their incredible works. For me, what was exciting about this opportunity was the possibility of launching this kind of show within a show, right? So I have my Wunderkammer that I've been working with and with, collaborators and assistants for some time, but now to be opening up and creating these new Wonder Chambers that represent, again, other people's perspectives and expertise. Again, I emphasize expertise because as an artist, I realized in initially broaching this project that is so kind of far reaching that I'm not an expert in these topics, but that as it would grow, more exports, more voices, more people would come in. And I had so much fun the other night. So we created Google Forms. And so each person we're inviting, they get to describe, and when I say we, I'm talking about Sue, my studio assistant. So when they send the Google Forms, we ask like what kind of, do they want an interior or exterior, or their color palettes, what are their inspirations, what are the objects they'd like to have in the space. And then we do research and put together questions, and then my avatar interviews their avatar. Of course, all of this is, I've done one complete one and we're in the midst of doing 2 more, and there are other ones, queued up. But I'm so excited about just kind of instantiating, it seems like the right word for me, even though it's virtual, but instantiating in a virtual space the ideas of other people. And so the other night I was working on someone, I stayed up all night. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And I actually also started to make common threads between some of my interests with this person. And basically after I sent it to the person, they were like, oh, it's like a portrait. You've made a self-portrait of me as a space, a place, I also like to distinguish space from place because I really want to build places for people, because space is this thing we inhabit, but place is when it becomes about your identity, when it becomes something that is significant and holds stories and holds context. And so making these places that become portraits of these people, so exciting. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, I realized that I didn't mute myself through that. I'm so sorry. That is so exciting, and it always comes back to this feeling of community and people feeling like they belong and can relate to your artworks and the places that you're making for them. And for them to be excited about that as well, I think is really heartwarming. I think it's lovely. So the Wunderkammer is this ever-evolving project. And you've already done so much with it. Where is it going next? What are your big plans for this project and all of its possibilities?
So far, it's been myself and a few, people who have been assisting or collaborating or a little bit of both on this project. And I'm so grateful to all of them. But, I also teach full time. I have other projects that I'm working on as well in conjunction. And so the one thing is time. And so it would be marvelous if, there could be some support or granting for the project, of course, in the long run. I mean, it does feel like for me, a project that is dynamic and ever growing. It's not like, oh, I made this project and I'm done with it, right? And so, as I mentioned a little bit earlier when I was presenting, one new extension after doing these interviews with all of these astounding people when creating wonder chambers for them that are kind of linked to the Wunderkammer itself is actually creating a toolkit, an actual tool. And I'll need to work with some developers because I'm not a great programmer myself, but creating a toolkit that I could actually provide to other people so that they could build their own 3D wonder chambers that really exemplifies or represents their positionalities, the things that are meaningful to them, the things that they feel like we need to kind of go forward with. And so that's one aspect of it. And so letting it kind of grow in that way. I mean, I have at least committed to on paper or on digital paper in a file that I want to conduct 28 interviews. So for the different number of cabinets that are represented in the main chamber so that they could all be linked to all of these different people who represent so many different philosophies, positionalities on these topics. And we'll see if I'm able to realize that in this lifetime, but I hope so.
Carla, we don't know how you do it. You're such a busy lady. we don't know how you do it. So that was all of my questions for you. But I really want to put it to everyone here, if they have any questions they would like to ask, to feel free to jump on. And
but thank you so much for coming, and indeed, I mean, your work was astonishing when I saw it. And all right, well, thank you so much for coming, and I look forward for our next event. Just to be clear and sure that everyone now understand that we will go Zoom, fully Zoom, and only Zoom for the pleasure of everybody. So hopefully seeing you everyone very soon. Take care. Well, thank you, Carla, again, and thank you for coming all.
thanks.
Thanks, everyone. This was so great. Thank you, Bella, for your wonderful questions. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.